It's great to be here. It's such an exciting event in the evolution of the homeless service system and homeless policy in Australia. I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I acknowledge the Minister for Housing for coming out so soon into government. And we've got a lot of interstate visitors here today who are developing expertise and have some fantastic practice going on, and I really appreciate you coming here to Melbourne and sharing with us what you've been doing and thinking and researching. Boundless Energy, thanks very much, Jane. I come to this today after supporting some staff last night who are involved in the death of a young woman who has been homeless for a very long time. So I'm not going to be necessarily full of the same amount of energy as usual. And it's interesting, I was at a funeral in this room last year actually. So not to get too morbid, but what we're here about today is to talk about a new approach to trying to identify people most at risk of death while homeless. And the good thing is we've got solutions. Just want to kick off with a bit of audience participation, if that's all right. I'll usually get the last at the end of the session and people are walking off or sleeping, but I just wanted to know who here does not want to solve chronic homelessness in Melbourne? Okay, it's unanimous. Fantastic. This is going to be a really exciting event, I think. We've got a great edition of Parity, we've got unanimous commitment, and actually in this room we could solve the problem and we can do it before winter, and I'd love to talk to you about how I think that's possible. Our colleagues in Brisbane have just finished housing their top 50 most vulnerable people identified in the registry week up there, which is a 22% reduction in rough sleeping in inner Brisbane. So there's tangible results, and for the most vulnerable. There's people from South Australia here. How many people have you housed in South Australia in Street to Home over the years? 700? Fantastic. And that's just so inspiring for us here in Melbourne because we know we can do this. We've had a bit of a slow start in getting access to housing in particular. We've got 3 people housed in permanent housing so far, but like I think Brisbane had a fairly slow start, I'm confident that once people see that this is possible and see the benefits, that it'll be just like a snowball effect. I really think, we are at the cutting edge of serious social policy change. I reckon in the future we'll look back on this forum, this edition of Parity, the work being done across Australia to identify the most vulnerable, and we'll think back and go, can you remember when we had chronic rough sleeping in Melbourne? People may not remember, but it was never a part of the landscape of modern cities to have people who are chronically homeless. It was something that emerged in the 1980s and correlates really closely with the reduction in expenditure on things like public housing. And we can, again, return to a time when we do not have to accept chronic rough sleeping in our cities. I wanted to talk to you today about why it's important to bring a street-to-home approach to Melbourne, what street-to-home is, and the challenges we face realising the amazing potential of this new approach. So why is it important to bring street-to-home to Melbourne? We all know, and there's a heap of people here with expertise and long histories, longer than mine, working in health and mental health, specialist homeless services. We've got an amazing web of services crisscrossing our inner city. So why on earth do we need a new service when we've got all the services out there that we could possibly want? And especially, why would we want one developed and refined in the United States, which is not really usually held up as a great example of social policy? From my point of view, earlier last year we went out and asked people to refer people into our Elizabeth Street HomeGround facility. And it became apparent to me that despite this web of services, huge amounts of outreach going on, that there is a huge number of people out of the system, and it's those most vulnerable who aren't connected into the system and certainly locked out of housing. So I've worked in the sector over 22 years and have thought, you know, it's a pretty good sector, we've all worked hard to build this great system, and it was a real eye-opener to me, to be honest, to hear about the stories of people who are still locked out there and getting damaged by homelessness. So that was a good enough reason to think that we haven't actually solved this problem and that we could do better. But I was also attracted to it because it offered a new evidence-based approach to an old problem that we had collectively failed to solve. And as much pride as we all have in our work, we have failed to solve this issue and we can do much better. Another thing that attracted me was it was a challenging methodology. It was not just doing the same old stuff, because doing the same old stuff has failed to solve the problem here. So offering up a new and very challenging approach to trying to identify the most vulnerable rough sleepers was also very exciting, to try something different. And and if anyone's read my article in the Parity edition, I certainly came into this with some huge amount of scepticism and assumptions about how Australian rough sleepers were going to respond to the methodology of trying to go out and survey people at 4 a.m. in the morning. And luckily, Brisbane, who are absolute champions in driving forward a lot of homeless innovation, allowed a group of us from Melbourne to go up and participate in this registry week, because it'd be safe. It was great for us to go and see it happen in another Australian city and see how people reacted. And I can speak for everyone I know who participated in that it was one of the most moving experiences. That people were incredibly generous with their time. They were grateful that people were actually out there trying to find out what their needs were and to do something about homelessness. And if you've visited our Facebook site in Melbourne for Street to Home, you'll see the amazing stories of people refusing to take the $10 because someone else more in need could use it. So all of those assumptions I had were blown away in Brisbane, and I was very excited to be part of doing this in Melbourne. And I really acknowledge the leadership of our Office of Housing to look to these models and to take a gamble, to actually go, yeah, all right, if it can actually reduce rough sleeping, we'll give it a go here. And hats off to people in the department in Victoria for giving it a go. And I know a lot of people have been confronted with the idea of the registry week approach. And I really would ask you that the alternative is, the evidence is there. If we do nothing, people will die within 5 years who are most vulnerable. Or we can try something new and identify who they are and get them into a home and to see them live a far more fulfilling life. So what is Street to Home? Sorry, I just wanted to make one other comment. Just thinking about office-based services and outreach services working on a business hours approach, so 9 to 5, even 7 days a week. It's a radically different world out on the streets at 4 a.m. in the morning, and the methodology that was refined really does show that. And you could see that as the sun starts to come up, the people who are sleeping rough at that time start to move on and become invisible, and they are not the same people who are coming into our services seeking assistance. Some of them obviously go to meal programs, which are really important, but they're not fronting up to all of our services asking for help. They've given up, basically. So Street to Home, what is it? It's a methodology. The unique thing about Street to Home is that it uses a specific methodology that I've explained to go out and find those most vulnerable. So there's a survey tool and there's scoring that happens, and you can actually identify who the top 50 in need are, and you can actually then follow them through and house them and keep them housed. So it's identifying the sickest people who are most damaged by the experience of homelessness and likely to die in the next 5 years. They're also, against a lot of assumptions, they're spending disproportionate amounts of time in our emergency departments because they're sick, right? So, and they don't have regular treatment. A lot of great outreach is happening in the health sector. but a lot of people are fronting up to emergency departments in disproportionate numbers, costing us all a huge amount of money simply to treat the symptoms of their homelessness, on and on and on and on, and not solve the problem. So it's finding the right people who are most vulnerable, and the program key elements are simple and have been proven to be successful time and time again for as long as the homeless system's been around. It's simply about assertive housing-focused outreach and permanent housing. All kinds of housing, social housing on estates, housing dispersed out through the community. And that's the proven solution to homelessness, and that's what we're trying to implement for this particular group of people that have been locked out of housing for such a long period of time. The great thing about Registry Week as well is that it does create a sense of urgency. You've probably seen in the media, in the print media, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a series of articles. Now, we've seen this over the years, and that's really quite heartening to people working in the field. But what tends to happen is the issue drops out of the media and the media moves on to some other issue. And what the Registry Week does, and did here in Melbourne, we had 80 volunteers from 18 different organisations out at that hour participating in this, and the huge amount of energy that was created as a result really brought a sense of urgency about solving this issue. Okay, so finally I wanted to wrap up by just talking about the challenges we've faced to date. We've got a massive, well-developed system of support services out there, outreaching, providing specialist health and mental health services for street to home to build upon. Access to housing is the key challenge in Melbourne, as it was in Brisbane, and I presume everywhere else. This was something that started to... people effectively started to show what was possible, and then it became obvious that this was the thing to do. The barriers to access public and community housing keep this group of our most vulnerable chronically homeless locked out and on the streets and getting damaged. And it's quite an interesting thing that our policy for the quickest access to public housing here in Melbourne actually makes this group of people ineligible. They need to be in THM, or Transitional Housing Managed Arranged Accommodation. So it's not like THMs are arranging for people to sleep rough and that's some legitimate form of housing. So it's the well-intentioned policy to try and target those most in need, make sure they come into services, get the help. You'll be able to assess them more, write a good case for why they should be treated more quickly. Doesn't work for everyone, and in fact locks this group out of housing. And we've had a lot of great work done in the Office of Housing trying to help us with that, to try and help fast track what can be quite exhaustive application processes. What I say to you all, and I'm not being flippant about this, I really think this is a social policy issue that we can solve together. And I'd say to the Minister and to everyone else here that we can actually do it. We can actually, we've inherited this problem, we've contributed to it, we've all played a part in creating the system we have today that has failed this group of people. The beautiful thing is, together we can solve it. And even more amazing is that there is a solution under construction right now, and we've got 3,000 social housing units under construction in Melbourne, and all we're asking for is 200 of those initially to really show what can be done. We found 170 people in Registry Week in Melbourne. Can you imagine if we could actually offer housing to that 170 people? And there are others who are being discharged, who are in crisis accoms. There are others who will fill their space if we don't keep offering more housing. The previous government offered 200 properties to families who were stuck in rooming houses, and we would all agree that that's an appalling thing, but they were able to find a way to find a quota of 200 properties for that group, and all we're asking is that a similar quota be provided to this group of highly vulnerable people in Melbourne. At the same time, we're going to save huge amounts of money in our health system, in our mental health system, and people are going to lead much more productive lives. So that's the challenge I throw out to all of us, to actually do what we can to keep reflecting on this issue, to measure our results and to see what we can do in terms of offering up and finding more housing solutions. We've got the support services, we just need the housing. Thanks very much. Have a great day.